In this video, we will learn how to use field array with Formik. In the previous videos, we had learned how to use Formik with React and also then do validations using Yup in Formik. So if you haven't seen those videos, first go ahead and see them. They would be provided in the description. And then let's see how do we use field array. So what are field arrays and why do we use them? Field arrays help with common array or list manipulations. So typically what we have used so far are single values. You had text boxes or checkboxes or radios or drop downs, single value going in. Here we have an array of values. So you want to take a list of names, a list of products wherein an array is getting formed. So that is what field array helps us with. In name property, pass the path of the relevant array, gives access to ArrayHelper methods via render props which assist in adding and removing values in the array. So you also would want to do that functionality, add another item or remove this item. So we can do that using the ArrayHelper methods. And that's how we write it, field array, and that's the component. So if we do a couple of exercises, this will become clearer. So let's create a form using Formik and FieldArray which creates a shopping list with the names of the items in the shopping list. So we're creating a shopping list and you want to put a lot of items in it. So how would we do that? So here in our main component, so these are two sample examples that we have given, say name list1. So this is the name of that shopping list and these are the items in it. So it's a JSON and you can see item Colgate, Pepsi, Maggie, and this is the second list. And then we have a simpler display of it wherein we display all the shopping lists and with the edit and add a shopping list. So this is what we want to implement. So let's now start making our form. So let's get down to it. So let's start with our standard imports. So these are our standard imports. Then for Formik, what do we want to import? We need Formik, we need field, we need form, and we also need field array because we would be using field array. Once we have done it, let's create our class, say shopping form extends component, and at the end of it let's just do an export default shopping form. Now inside it we will need to define our render. So let's define our render. And what do we do within our render? First, we would be getting, let's define it for a simple case where we are not getting any edit, and then we will just add the edit functionality to it. So let's define a list which is, say, an empty JSON. Next, what do we need to do? Let's just define our return, and in which we define our Formik component. Within the Formik component, what do we need to do? We will first need to define our initial values. And what are they? Name is an empty string and we have items which is an empty array. So remember, we're not doing it for the edit case. We will just come back and then do the edit case. Next, we want to define our onSubmit. OnSubmit is equal to, it get the values, and what does it do with the values? With the values it will call this dot props dot, and what's the function being passed here? It is onSubmit. OnSubmit, and we will just submit, say, the values. Next, what do we want to do? And we can just do this dot props dot history dot push and say a slash. so that we will then display the list. Now that we have done it, let's now start using our Now earlier we had not used values. Now we will need to use values. So we pass values here. And what does this return? So here we will construct our form. So now within the form, what do we do? Let's just show, say, details of the shopping list. Next, we need to get the name. So let's do the standard div class name is equal to form group. And within that, we just show the label name. Now what would we need to do? We would need to add the field for it. So let's add the field. So name will be a field. It's a single value. We don't need a field array for name. So name is equal to name. Next, what do we want to do? Type is text. Placeholder, let's put in a placeholder. What's the placeholder say? Name of the shopping list, and let's put its class name is equal to form control. So we have defined it. So we have defined this field. Now next, what do we want to do? We want to show now an array so that we can take all those items in. So now we will create a field array. And what do we do within the field array? So within the field array, first let's give its properties. Name is equal to, so what is the name here? It's the items, that's the array we had given, and we then define its render. So this is important. How do we write it? Render, and render takes the array helpers that we had talked about. And what does it do? So now we want to show all the items that were there in this array items. So we can just do a values dot items dot map. So this is why we need values. We will be using values dot items. So values dot items is that array now, and in that map, for let's say each item, let's call it say t1 and its index. What do we want to do? We will now need to display each row or each value in that array. So let's put in it. So let's define a row. Div class name is equal to row, and let's say give it a border, spacing, and key is equal to index. So now within this, what do we need to do? Within this, we will need to show two things. One, a value of the item, so a field for it. So class name is equal to, let's say, column 7. And now within it, what do we show? We will need to show our field to take in that value. So within this, we just have that same field. What is the name of this field? So this is the important part. So the name of this field will be items and the index number of it. So that element of that array. So how do we put that? Is equal to items, and in that array, let's put that index in. What is the index? It is index and dot item. So why dot item? Because it's an array, it's a JSON. So we are taking the item field here. So in the main component, if we look at sample, so we had items. Each element in that array is this. So we are talking about this item here. So that is why we have put in field name as this. What is the type? Is text. Now what are other values we need? Let's placeholder is product name. So it's to enter the product name in the shopping list. And class name is form control. So we have defined our field. Now we have defined our field. Next, what do we need to do? Next, what we need are the buttons to add or delete these elements in the field. So let's put that in, and it will start becoming clearer as we run it. So let's just give it, say, a column 2. And within this, we will just put in a button. So let's define a button. Class name is equal to, say, btn, btn sm, btn warning, and let's say mr2. So some styling we have given. Next, what do we need to do? We need to define the on click. So what is the on click? On click is, now what do we want to do? Here we want to say this button is to delete this row. So let's put in the text. So how do we delete it? We will use the array helpers that we got. Array helpers dot remove. So they expose that array to us, and we will remove which one? This index. So it will just remove this index. So this is one row that we have created, the name of the details of the field as a text to enter it, and a delete button for each. Once we have done it, then what do we need to do? We at the end of it, we will also need to provide a button to add more rows. So let's provide it button class name is equal to btn success, say mb2. And what do we show here? On click is equal to array helpers dot push. So we are pushing an empty item into the array helpers, and let's give it the text, add item to shopping list. So now what do we need to do? Now that our field array part is over, or we could have just closed it like this itself. We don't need to put in a separate tag. The field array is closed. Once the field array is closed, we need to add another button for the submitting the form. So let's add that. Div class name is equal to form group. Within that, let's add a button. The type of this button is submit. So because on clicking it, we will do submit. Class name is equal to btn primary, and let's add an mr2. And what do we show here? We just show the text add. So now we have created all of it. Let's go ahead and test it. Add a new shopping list. So we get the new shopping list. Let's give it a name, say list 4. Add item, and on add item, it is sending it back. So what we should do is on these buttons, let's give the type is equal to button. So that's one button that we used, and the other button we have used here is this. So define the type as button here. Let's go ahead and test it again. So now we can see we get the product name and the delete button, both of them. If I click on delete, this is gone. I can add as many as these. So let's put in the list, say list 3, Pepsi, Maggie, and let's say Coke. Now if I click on add, you can see I have list 3 with these function pieces, Pepsi, Maggie, Coke. We can add another, let's put it as a list 4, and which say has Colgate. Now if I want to delete Colgate, I can even delete it. So let's put in something else. Let's again say Pepsi and let's say Coke. So we are getting it fine. Now what do we want to also add to it? We want to add the edit functionality. So let's go back here and add it. So what will we get in edit? In here we will get our props. So we will get in props. What all do we get in props? In props, in the case of edit, we get the index and the lists. So let lists, or let's say const lists is equal to this dot props. Next, what do we want to do? We want to get the index. Const index is equal to this dot props dot match dot params. Now if index is truthy, then what should the list be? Lists plus index, otherwise it's in this. So this is what we have done. Next we need to pass the index on the submit. That is what it expects. If we look at the main component, it expects the index. And what do we need to do? We will just change this to, if index is truthy, then this is update, else it is add. Let's go ahead and test. So let's click on edit, and what we are seeing is exactly the same thing. It did not get it. Why? What did we miss? We did not initialize the values. So the name should be list dot name, or this should be list dot items, or this. So if you miss the initialization, this is the error you will get. Let's test it again. So now if I go ahead and edit it, so we get the list, the items, I can delete them. If I update, you can see this list has become empty. Now I can add an item to it. And the earlier one, I can add another item to it, say nutties. And the edit is also working fine. Next, what we want to do is also do validation of the values that we are putting in FieldArray. So in the earlier videos, we had used the validation of Formik and then the validation schema of Yup. So here we will use Yup, which is typically the standard way to do validation in the FieldArray. We will use of, which specifies the array of in Yup, and within it define the schema for the elements in the array. So there are two levels of validation that we can define with FieldArray on the whole array. So example, in this case, the shopping list should have say minimum 2 items. The shopping list is required. So that is on the whole array, and the error message in that case is a string. And then within each element of the array, so each item, the product name should not be empty, or the product name should have minimum 3 characters, or there could be something else. There's a number we are taking in on which we need to run some validations. So there are two levels of validation here, on the whole array and on each element of the array. When we have errors on the elements of the array, error is an array with the error text mapped to the field of the array. So to the field of that array, if there are multiple fields, it's mapped to it. So there are two ways it can generate it. The error is given to us either as a string or as an array. So this will become clearer as we implement it here. So add the following validations. The list cannot be empty and should have at least 2 items. So this is a validation at the level of the array. So the whole array should not be empty is required and should have at least 2 items. Each item in the list is a required string with minimum 3 characters. Now this is a validation within each element of the array. Each item in the list is required, the product name is required and should have minimum 3 characters. So these are the two validations we want to add, and let us see how do we add that. So here in our code, let's import the error message, and also we will need yup, import star as yup. A lot of people use yup as with a capital Y, which is why we are doing it here. You can also use it as a small y, which is, both of them are fine. So import star as yup from yup. Next, what do we need to define? We need to define our validation schema. So const list validation schema is equal to yup dot object dot shape, and to the shape we will provide all our schema. So we have name. What is name? Name is yup dot string dot required, and this is for the name of the shopping list. So name of the shopping list is required. If you want to have a minimum length, etc., you can add those validations. The second is on the items. So items is yup dot, it's an array and it's an array of. So what are each item in the array? So of will tell us how to define the schema for each item in this array. So yup dot object dot shape. So each element has this shape. Now what does it have? It has a item. It has a single field item. And what is it? It is yup dot string. It is required. And what is the error message we want in required? Product name is required. And what do we want? Minimum, say 3 characters. Product name is too short. So this is how we have defined it. So each object has this. And then what do we want to do? Array of, and we can say now here dot required. So we want this to be not empty, this array. Now we define it. Items are required in the shopping list. Dot, what do we want? Minimum 2 elements in the array. And what's the message? Minimum of 2 items should be in the shopping list. So these are the validations we want. So let's repeat it. So array of, this is the validation we have defined for each item in the array, each item of the array. Now what was the shape of the item in the array? If we go back to the main component to see it, this is our array items. Each item is this, each element is this. So that is what we have defined here. It's an item, name is item, it's a string, it's required, and it should have minimum 3 characters. After that, we have defined the validation schema, what we need for the array. The array is required, so items are required in the shopping list, and it should have a minimum of 2 items. Once we have done that, what do we need to do next? We need to configure it. So let's say validation schema is equal to list validation schema. So we have configured the validation. Now we need to display our errors. So here we will also take errors, and why we'll take it will become clearer. So we need to display our errors. First error we will need to display is here. For the name of the shopping list, class name is equal to text danger, and we just show error message name is equal to name. So this is the error message for the name of the shopping list. Next, we want to show error messages for this. So we will show a set of combined error messages at the end of it. So where do we show it? So here, before we close everything, add item to shopping list. Here we will create our div class name is equal to text danger. And we now need to show our errors. So before we show our errors, let's not show our errors here. Let us first understand the errors structure of errors, and let's do a say here a console.log errors comma errors. So let's display them on the console so that we can see it. Let's first run this. So now I have a new shopping list. Errors you can see is empty. Now if I click on add, name of the shopping list is required. So that's the error, which is fine. Let's put in a list 3. So this error goes away. And what is the other error? It has items. Minimum of 2 items should be there in the shopping list. Let's add an item here. So we get an item, and now what is the error? Product name is required, and now you can see this errors items is now an array. So it was earlier a string and now it's become an array. So this is how this moves. So if it is an error at the level of the array, then it's a string. If it is for each item in it, then it will start mapping to that. Let's add another item here, and let me put in here Pepsi. Now if we look at the array, so now the array error is at index 1. So which is here index 1, product name is required. So we will either need to show this text message or the text message which comes from the string, which is, let's show it here, the string which is at the array level. So how would we do that? So where were we? This is where we had created it. So this is what we need to do. And where do we get the errors from? So if we check the errors, where were the errors? The errors were in errors dot the name of it, items. So we can first say check type of errors dot items is equal to string. So if this is a string, then we can just display it errors dot items. Else what do we need to do? If it is truthy, errors dot items is truthy, that means it's an array. So that means it's an array. Else we know it is, we don't need to show anything. So this is our structure. So now here in the array we need to show it. Let's maybe first run it like this. So add item to shopping list. We are always getting array. Why is that happening? So we made an error here. Let's test it again. So we are getting minimum of two strings, two items in the shopping list. So when the error is at the level of a string, it's a string, we are displaying it. Now we are getting an array. So now we need to be able to take this name out of it and show it. So how will we do that? So this is an array. So now we can say errors dot items dot reduce. We will use reduce to get the string from it. Accumulated comma current. And what does that go to? If we have gotten some string so far, which is if accumulated is truthy, we return accumulated. Else if current, if this value is truthy, what will we return? Cur dot item. That is where the message was. Otherwise, we continue to return accumulated and we initialize this with an empty string. So let's understand this code. We are reducing it. We are finding the first error message that we get here. So if accumulated is truthy, means we have gotten an error message because an empty string is falsy. We will return it. Otherwise, if the current item is truthy, which is it's not an empty JSON or it exists, then we just take the item and return it. So this should show it to us. Let's test it. So we get minimum of two items and now we get product name is required. Let's make it Z. So product name is too short. Now we get the change. Minimum of two items should be there in the product list. Let's now test it properly. List 4. Let's say we add Pepsi to it. Add another shopping item. Now we have not given it the name. So Coke. And now this works fine. In the edit, if I delete all of them, then we start getting the same thing. Product name is required. Product name is too short. And this is working fine. So this is how we have done validation. Let's recap it. We defined the validation schema. The validation schema was defined at two levels. At the array level, where we required it to be required and to have minimum two elements, and then the shape of each object in the array. That is what we defined. Then here, while displaying it, the first thing we did, we passed errors also in this here. So important, we need the errors here, and instead of just using error message, which will not work here, we had to construct our string depending upon the type, whether it's a string or whether it's an array. If it was a string, we displayed it. If it was an array, we used reduce to get the string and display it. So this is how we would do validation here. Next, what do we want to do? Modify the above form so that each element in the shopping list has two fields, item and quantity. So right now, so far we have had just one field. Now we want to handle two fields and let's see how that works. Also add the following validations. Quantity is a number. It's an integer with a minimum value of 1. So let's do that. So first let's go to our main component and here let's just add quantity is 1. So this is the structure now. It has an item and a quantity. In our shopping list also, let's just change the display. So where we are just showing the item dot name, let's create item dot x dot item dash x dot quantity. So we can show the item and the quantity. And we will now handle the shopping form. Let's first see what this gets us. So this is the display here. Now what we want both the name of the product and the quantity. So let's go to our shopping form to make the change. So where do we start making the changes from? So the first thing we would need here in our field array is we would need another field here. So let's just copy this code for the item. Now this will be, let's say, column. We had 7 to 9, so I can give it column 2. The name of this is quantity. It is, say, quantity. So this is what it is. Next, what do we want to show? We want to run validations on top of it. So how would we run validations on top of it? Let's define its shape. So we had item. Similarly, we will define quantity. Quantity is yup.number. It's an integer, and say minimum is 1. This is what we have defined. And for a moment, let's not define any error messages. Let's see what happens. We will need to come here into where we are displaying it. So it should be current.item or current.quantity. So depending upon where the error message comes, we need to do an or. So this should work fine. So these changes should work fine. Let's test it. So we get name and quantity. Let's first give it a name. Let's put in, say, Pepsi. And these validations are not getting displayed. So why is that the case? Why are we not getting any validations here? Let's have a look. What's the issue? So we have also not given required. So let's give it, say, a required. And now let's see whether we get the validations. So what you can see, items 0.quantity is a required field. Let me put it in. So this is the typical error message that we give because we have not specified it. Let me give, say, it a number 2.4. Must be an integer. Let me give it a value -4. Must be greater than or equal to 1. So these are the default messages that we get. Must be a number type. So we can now change those messages and provide our messages. Let's say quantity is required, integer, quantity must be an integer, quantity must be an integer. Again, we want the same message. Minimum quantity is 1. So let's test it now. So let's put in the product name. Now it shows quantity is required, quantity, minimum quantity is 1, and so on. We get that. Let's edit it. We get all the existing quantities there. Let's just put a 0 after each one of them. So you can see we have updated it. If we go back on edit, we can see it. So here you can now start realizing the power and the ease that field arrays and Yup give us. So here we have used field arrays. You could have as many fields you want to define, and you can slightly over a period of time, as you get more confidence, start building in more complex logics with it.